Welcome. This is the 86th episode of Women on Wealth. I'm Julina Ogilvie, and this episode is financial intimacy for couples. And I'm joined in this episode today by Adam Kol, who is the couples financial coach. Adam, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Julina.
I'm so excited about this topic because I think that a lot of couples have a lot of emotion when it comes to discussions around finances. And I know you have some stories, but let me give you a quick introduction if I can. Adam helps couples go from financial overwhelm or fighting to clarity, teamwork, and peace of mind. You are a certified financial therapist, a certified mediator, and a tax attorney with a Duke Law degree and master's in tax law from NYU. That's quite the combination.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You are also a husband, dad, you're a musician. And your wisdom has been shared with the Wall Street Journal, the Baltimore Ravens. My sister and brother-in-law are massive fans. You've been shared with CNBC, News Nation, and more. So welcome again.
Thank you so much. And, you spoke about like a lot of couples and a lot of people having emotions around money, and you're right. One of the things that I always hope to impart is that the emotions are not our enemy. In fact, they are often a gateway to understanding each other better, connecting more, and being able to figure out and share our kind of goals and priorities. And that
Yeah.
allows you to then make a better plan to achieve the things that actually matter to you versus kind of guessing.
Yeah, I love how you introduced that because that's a common theme that we try to discuss a lot. And it can hinder so many people in making the right decisions, right?
Yes, I think so. And, even just with the nature of this podcast, for women who are partnered with men, it's like men are socialized regardless of whether they believe in like gender equality or it doesn't matter. We're still socialized that we're supposed to be the breadwinner and take care of our family. And so while men are can come in many different shapes and sizes, one of the ways is sometimes like they don't want to share the things they actually want because that's uncomfortable. It feels like they might not be being then enough of a provider.
Yeah.
Uh, and or they go the opposite way and they just like spend whatever they want, but it's oftentimes almost coming from the same kind of place.
Mm.
Uh, it just looks different on the surface.
Okay. Yeah. Let's start then with why do you think that these money conversations are so difficult for couples and what are the benefits of overcoming this discomfort?
Yeah. So, for the people listening, I would say it's a great moment to pause and ask yourself that question. Why are money talks difficult or why have they not happened? But broadly speaking, some of the most common reasons I see, usually there's a fear of getting shut down in some way, being told you're being ridiculous, or those things you want, I don't agree, or, I can't believe you're being this way about this thing. It's frankly similar fears to a lot of other areas in
Yeah.
life that, we have to push through and figure out how to, you know, share things and make it safe for our partners to share things. And money's still a taboo by and large. And so that also contributes to people's, like, if they don't feel confident in their own kind of like personal financial literacy, then there's now on top of that touchy emotional stuff, you now have often a feeling of overwhelm,
Yeah.
especially it's like I don't know where to start, or there might even be shame about your current situation and like you don't really want to talk about it because you don't want to admit that you have, let's say, debt, or even if your partner knows you have debt, maybe you don't really want to talk about it because it doesn't feel so good, or you
Yeah.
feel like there's something wrong with you or you're not being responsible, right? So all of those things combine to make it an area that a lot of people tend to avoid until they can't really avoid it anymore because the tension boils over.
Hmm.
And of course, that usually then doesn't make for a constructive dialogue when it does. So, that's part of the work, is like helping people be able to have those conversations not only more constructively, but have them sooner,
Yeah,
which is an important part. Because once the anger, frustration, resentment has calcified, it
that's
makes it a
really
lot more
hard.
difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these emotions that you come into a relationship with, to me, I mean, you kind of alluded to this already. There's still this stigma in society that we are trying to break away from, but we still are tend to follow, if that's fair. And
Mhm.
and then also the second I'm thinking of, which I find all the time, is that we have so many emotions that are from something in terms of how we were raised, whether it was a
Yep.
situation that occurred or whether it was how, our parents imparted financial lessons on us or didn't. Are you
Right.
finding the same thing?
1000%.
Yeah.
The one thing
Not
I'll
100.
say, really, I mean,
Yeah.
not 100. Like, it's the very first thing that I do with all my clients, and that I do in a book that I have coming out shortly, is
Yes.
having people reflect on that, and thinking
Absolutely.
about not just how did your parents handle money, but how did that impact you?
Yeah.
Because the trap is thinking that the circumstances dictate the outcomes, and only partially, right? So I always think of a client who they were from the same kind of socioeconomic background growing up,
Hmm.
and they were also the same race and racial minority in the US, and you might look at that and say, oh, there's probably a lot they had in common when it came to money.
Yeah.
And this is where it was sneaky. It's they did, but they didn't. So one of them said, I don't want to be that way again. I don't want to be poor again, how I grew
Yeah.
up. So I am going to do everything I can.
Everything possible.
I am going to pinch the pennies,
Yeah.
right? And the other one said, again, kind of like internally, subconsciously, I can't really rely on money to be there, so I might as well enjoy it while I've got it,
Yeah.
because who knows what tomorrow brings. And I think in society right now, we have these kind of like, we do a lot of labeling of people, and then there's kind of like a current that one of the labels is good and the other one is bad, right? It's
Yes.
like a lot when people talk about like attachment style stuff, and
Hmm.
they're like, oh yeah, the anxious attachment, they're the ones who are like, they want their relationship to work, and it's the avoidant one is the bad one because they don't want
Yeah.
to talk. And you can have a similar idea here. Like, it's usually, oh, we like applaud the saver, the one who saves more and spends less than their partner. And whatever truth there might be to any of those things, I can't say, I'm not an arbiter of that, but the bigger point is that they get us away from thinking about and connecting with the person who's right in front of us,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Because that client I referenced, they both had the same core trauma.
Which is so interesting, right? That you can go in two completely different directions. I guess, is there a mistake that you see couples make more often than not?
Yeah, and this is one of, I think it's maybe like the second chapter in the book, is about the biggest mistake that I see couples make,
Yeah.
which is going directly to the numbers, meaning like going straight to, okay, should we keep Hulu Live TV or cut it?
Yeah.
I'm saying that for a friend, not because my wife and I have ever had that
I
discussion.
just had this
Uh,
discussion last weekend with my husband.
yeah, and the thing is, why is it a mistake potentially, right? First of all, think about how this relates to you and your situation.
Yeah.
So, if you're somebody where you've talked about money with your significant other and it's always been great, and you guys are totally on the same page, and you know where you're at financially and what you're like, great. Keep listening to the podcast, but maybe do a different episode,
Yeah.
because like, right? If it's been a tough topic or you've been unsure how to bring it up or it's been a challenge, right? Then if you start with something like that, a particular decision,
Hmm.
here's what happens. Simply put, you're two different people. So you're going to have two different sets of subjective preferences.
Yeah.
And then if you launch into this
Yeah.
without knowing, having a kind of good foundation and where you're at financially and what you're trying to achieve, and doubly so if you don't feel like emotionally safe
Yeah.
talking about this stuff, it's just, it's hard to imagine how it doesn't end in a fight
Yeah.
or one person capitulates, but that is not really the dynamic you're looking for in the long run because it leads to resentment or feeling separated or alone or not, like on parallel tracks and not really living life together. And I see that a lot with my clients.
And I was laughing about the Hulu comment because we just went through this, but I can you can see how easy a conversation like that can derail a
Yeah.
couple into a massive argument about finances
Hmm.
in general,
Hmm.
versus you can have a healthy discussion of, well, why are we paying for Hulu and Disney and Peacock and you can have an active discussion. That's what I like to think of it as, um, because you hopefully have already set a good foundation. Is that fair to say?
Right. And your particular choice of streaming platforms is a little too close to home.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that foundation will change so much, not just about that particular conversation, but
Mhm.
I always think and talk a lot about like the flow through effects,
Yeah.
I think you would call them, where it's like if we have a good conversation, then the next time there's something on my mind, I'm more likely to bring it up. And then that's going to make that conversation easier, which will then make future conversations easier.
Yeah.
And, look, life is not so perfectly linear. It's more complicated than that in
A-
reality, but
Absolutely.
the idea that,
Yeah.
you know, building that foundation will pay big dividends in multiple kinds of ways.
And I love that you just use the word linear because I also am a big believer in this. It's so hard to have a healthy conversation with a spouse or a partner because we are not supposed to live in this linear world, right? We have to plan for retirement as soon as possible, but at the same time, we may want to buy a house, upgrade a house, buy a car, plan for college. Like all of this needs to happen at once. So you have to have a healthy conversation of, well, how are you allocating your savings relative to your budget and your spending and all of your streaming media accounts? And I think that's where it can easily derail.
Yes, if you can build that foundation and feel not necessarily, listen, you may not ever feel like comfortable talking about it, but
Yeah.
like
No, no,
if you
never.
can, right,
I
but
don't.
if you can at least tolerate it
Yeah.
better, right, then that allows you to have a lot of really relevant dialogues. Like, for example, let's say you and your spouse both think that higher education is important and you want to support your kid in pursuing that route if that's the
Right.
route they choose.
Right.
Well, what does support mean? Is
Uh,
it financial support? Is it just emotional support? If it is financial support, how much?
yeah.
Am I going to pay for you to go to NYU for undergrad, $300,000 without a scholarship? Or is it, state or community college, or you're on your own, kid?
Yes.
These
Those are not easy
are,
discussions.
they're not,
No.
they're not. And so they go beyond just the raw numbers
Yeah.
or the questionnaires about risk tolerance, right? Those things are important and valuable and helpful, but there's other pieces of this conversation.
All right. I want to ask a question, but before I ask it, I'm going to ask one that I think needs to be addressed first.
Hmm.
So if you, I'm a big believer in this whole idea of your money story. And the
Hmm.
more I'm in this business and the more people I talk to, the more I am not only acknowledging how important it is, but I'm
Hmm.
also starting to realize myself how true my own money story is and how it's affected me. So, can you talk about the importance of understanding your partner's money story?
Yes. Um, I'm really glad you asked this question for a number of reasons. So I
And maybe, oh,
start,
sorry, maybe back up by explaining money story in case I've talked about it in previous podcasts, but in case if this is new to someone.
sure. One of the first things I do with my clients and in my book is have people go through this series of self-reflection questions, right? How did your parents handle money and how did that affect you?
Yeah.
What has it been like in this relationship? What about in past relationships? And there's really no limit to the amount of questions you can contemplate, but I hone in on some that have been the most impactful in my experience with my clients, and that kind of thing is really helpful for a number of reasons. One is definitely this world of like your limiting beliefs and
Hmm.
how it might impact the things you're doing and the results you're getting in your financial life. Now, you understanding your money story, what does that do for you when it
Hmm.
comes to having a financial conversation?
Yeah.
For me, it's like anxiety to the nth. My son just turned one the other day, and my wife did an incredible job with the theme and design and everything with the party.
Yeah.
And she's like, I want to get one of those little portable photo printers. And it was just like my brain automatically,
Yeah.
why? I see all the time. You can go get prints for free at CVS and Walgreens, just type the right coupon code. And to be able to know that
Hmm.
and know that my brain goes there,
Yeah.
the idea is that hopefully it buys me enough mental, emotional space
Yeah.
so that I don't just jump down my wife's throat or like shut down
Yeah.
and leave her being like, what the heck? Like,
Yeah.
does he not want this party? Does he not like my ideas? Right. So, okay, fine. We figured it out. We got the
Yeah.
photo printer. Now it's like, oh, shoot, it only comes with enough ink and paper to do 5 prints.
Yeah.
And we needed to do more than 5 prints, certainly, even just for the party. And it's like, oh, dang it.
Yeah.
They always get you with the ink, but the point is like, these are the kinds of things. It's not that they're bad thoughts or that they're wrong thoughts,
Right.
but just trying to have a little bit of self-awareness
Yeah.
that this is where my brain goes. If even just to tell my wife, like, whatever I'm doing right now, it's
Yeah.
not about you. It doesn't mean I don't like this idea or it's not a good one. Give me a couple minutes to
Hmm.
sit with this.
Yeah.
Hey, go
And
ahead.
I think it's interesting because you're hitting on a couple of things. One is it doesn't always have to be a large, extravagant purchase. I'm the
Mm-mm.
same way. I will get anxiety over small things. And I think my family now acknowledges this and they try to walk through with me. Okay, this is why, Mom, I want those volleyball shoes. But for me, that anxiety I've now come to realize was from when I was younger and I wasn't born poor. I grew up in a great family. I was fortunate, but I witnessed a parent lose a job. I witnessed a divorce and all that anxiety about them paying for college. I felt I was old enough to understand it all. And I think that's just how I react now too, in similar ways with certain purchases. But I think going back, for example, to talking about college, I was thinking,
Mm-hmm.
okay, we have all this anxiety as we're talking to our spouse or partner. I don't want my children to have that same anxiety because they're witnessing me go through it. And that's something I constantly think of. And I don't know if that's something you talk about with couples.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought this up because I was listening to a creator recently who's a parenting coach, and she said about how you got to think about the context. And so for you, when you're feeling your financial anxiety, it's not necessarily going to be received by your kids the same way maybe you
Mm,
received it when your parents did, because the environment that they raised you in, the way that they handled you and your emotions was very different. And
yeah,
I
interesting.
I think that, don't get me wrong, what I'm about to say is aspirational, and as a parent, it's hard, but trying to focus on how do I show my kids what life is and what it takes, and what relationships really are like,
Hmm.
and I go back and forth. It's like, people ask, should I argue with my spouse or fight with my spouse in front of my kids or not? Right. Or like, should I
Mm,
let my kids see my financial anxiety? And I could imagine it going different ways.
yeah.
But don't assume just because your kids witness you having emotions that that's a bad thing, or even complicated emotions. Because on the other side, they could grow up thinking like, if they don't see mom or dad or someone they look up to kind of normalizing
Yeah.
feeling some financial anxiety, then if they grow up and they feel financial anxiety, they're going to think something's wrong with them, or they're going to be embarrassed about it and hide it. And of course, you always want to be age appropriate, right? You don't want to talk about your financial stresses with your 4-year old. It's
Yeah.
just not appropriate. But as your kids get older, you shift that. And I had
Yeah.
a client where they made good money, and they had a couple of kids, and they helped both their kids out when they were in college and a little bit after. And what they'd been doing with one of their kids was just like, okay, we'll pay, your Uber bill, and also here's a credit card if you need for groceries, whatever. And we looked, and it was like, they were like, oh yeah, she's actually, that's more than we thought she would be spending on Ubers, and more than we wanted her to spend. And then they were looking at their own financial goals, and they determined that, what, if we gave her this amount, which was gave her less,
Yeah.
it would help us to achieve this financial goal. And they were really nervous about talking to her. And I'm not saying this story like I can guarantee you'll have the same result, but their daughter actually ended up thanking them, because she's like,
Wow.
this is good. Like, I need to learn how to manage this stuff. So you putting like some structure and some boundaries there, like, this is actually helpful. Like, people do ultimately want to learn how to adult, like, to the extent that it's can be an empowering thing or
Uh,
disempowering not to.
absolutely.
But they came to her from a place where they had cultivated a different kind of awareness around their finances. It wasn't a desperation and like, I'm so sorry, I'm the worst parent ever, I can't. It was much more grounded. They made a plan. It wasn't like an
Yeah.
immediate change. They kind of phased it in, and
That's
it
great.
really ended up working out well for both sides.
Yeah.
So again, the same action, if you have cultivated a certain kind of relationship with your kid, and also with your significant other, can go very differently, right? Like we were saying, the Hulu live TV thing goes
Yeah.
very differently if you and your spouse do or don't feel like you're good at having difficult conversations and feeling good at
Yeah.
the end. Same with the kids, right?
Absolutely. And that's a very powerful conversation that happens all the time, and it doesn't always go in the direction that you just shared. So that's a really good one to consider. And Adam, you have, and I think this is in your book, and I'll ask you about that in a second. You have 4 essentials that you believe every couple should address in their financial conversations. Can you kind of quickly address that and why you think they're so critical?
Yeah, the four essentials is basically just the four pieces of financial information
Hmm.
that are most critical to have, to understand, to bring awareness to. And I geek out about all kinds of things related to money and taxes and the law and all that, but that doesn't have to be everyone's experience.
Yeah.
But in terms of like, we're feeling really overwhelmed, or we just want to do, get the 80% of the benefit by doing the 20% of the work, this is where you start, right?
Yeah.
Your income,
Yep.
your expenses, your debts, any money that you owe, car, credit card, student loan, etc., and your assets. Anything's of value. It could be your home, could be collectibles, could be stocks, could be 401k. You know, that is where the conversation starts.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you figure out where are we at financially. And, it's basically, I found it to be the least complicated way to have a plausible grasp on your
Yeah.
financial situation. And then from there, that's when you can start to talk about, okay, well, this is where we are. Where do we want to get to?
Yep.
Right.
It
Whether
leads into a
it's,
budget.
yeah, right. Like, what do we want to do with our expenses? Do we want to
Yep.
shift them? What do we want to do? Do we need to generate more income to achieve our goals, et cetera, and thinking through all those trade-offs, right? And is worthwhile based on what matters to you. And that's at the end of the day, it's what my work is all about, is facilitating couples feeling more connected and
Yep.
having more of the stuff that matters to them, including
Yeah.
uh, emotionally and materially, right? Which money is a big piece of.
Absolutely. Well, and I love it because these are all the essentials of building a financial plan, whether it's early on and having a conversation with um, a partner or, later on in life where you really have to say, okay, do we have enough to retire? And do we have enough to retire in the way we want to retire? I guess is the way I should probably say it. But you have to start with these basic essentials. So I love that.
Thank you.
Um, no, thank you. And can you describe what, I don't know, do you have any other examples of an unhealthy financial discussion? Like what that looks like and how it just can kind of create this negative cycle?
Yes. So, I mean, at the most basic level, an unhealthy conversation is one that you say is an unhealthy conversation, right?
Fair.
Because different people have different tolerance for whatever. Some people grew up in a family where, shouting was the norm and they're okay with it. Some people grew up in a family where shouting was the norm and it's really traumatic for them,
Yeah.
and everything in between, right?
Yeah.
But the like a lot of other things in relationships, and if any of your listeners have done like couples therapy or anything like that,
Yeah.
the therapist may have talked with them about these patterns and cycles that we get into. And the biggest one for couples is that they avoid having these important, consequential, money related conversations.
Mhm.
But by avoiding it, like we were saying earlier, it's like you can't avoid it forever.
Yeah.
And at some point, the pressure is going to get too much and something's going to come out,
Yeah.
right? And usually when it comes out in that kind of context, it doesn't come out the way you want it to.
Hmm.
It and that makes it just far too easy for it to become a contentious, fighting conversation, one where both people walk away feeling not so great.
Yeah.
And not only does that stink to have a bad conversation, and not only is it frustrating to not be able to, you know, work on whatever financial thing you wanted to work on or achieve whatever goal you wanted to achieve, but it tends to leave kind of an emotional scar where next time we want to talk about money, even if it's subconscious calculation, it's like, oh, but last time it didn't go well.
Yeah.
So if anything, that'll discourage you. And while you might bring it up, you might bring it up a little bit later than last time.
Yeah.
And, last time you already brought it up at a point where things had boiled over.
Mm.
And it's like it just ends up kind of perpetuating itself. Where, I mean, a lot of my clients, when they come to me, it's like it feels hopeless to even have a constructive dialogue because they have so many data points for them that they're convinced, right? And
Yeah.
that's where something like these questions about your relationship with money come in, because we have to break the ice there,
Yeah.
and ideally in a way that doesn't reinforce the bad kind of cycles, And I find that talking about your relationship and history with money and all that actually not only does that, but supports constructive, positive cycles. And that's, by the way, not a conversation you only can have one time. You can keep
No.
coming back to that.
Hmm. And I think this example that you mentioned, along with kind of going back to the four essentials that you mentioned, it just hones in on the fact that this financial awareness is not something that one member of the couple should prioritize on their own. I joked earlier, but every family has a member of the family that's prioritizing one aspect over another. And the
Hmm.
financial conversation, it has to be mutual. One may actually pay the bill, but you have to have that conversation on how you're paying it, if that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's essential for both people to have the same amount of votes when you're
Yeah.
making these
Yes.
decisions.
And to have the votes, you
And
have to understand all of the aspects of the financial situation.
ideally, right? I mean,
Yes.
and look, if one person is like super knowledgeable and super into it, it's okay to rely on them to be your translator, for
Sure.
example, but you make sure that that's going to be hard to do if you don't feel like you can trust each other. So if you do, okay. If I'm handling something financially, my wife doesn't necessarily feel like she has to check my work because she trusts my like math and my integrity. But nevertheless, from time to time, she likes to go in and just for her own edification, make sure everything in the bank
Absolutely.
account makes sense and looks good.
Yep.
And
I like
I
that.
mean, she works in finance and there's a lot of financial stuff she knows more about than I do. But regardless, right, just being able to know where to find that information
Yeah.
and knowing and trusting that it's available to you and then feeling like you can talk to your significant other if you're feeling any sort of way about something,
For sure.
that is really the key. And then from there, whatever works for you. Like, just like one person might be in charge of meal planning, it's okay for one person to be in charge of planning for how much money you spend eating out at restaurants and choosing the restaurants. If that's, it's up to you guys.
Yeah.
My wife and I would never let that be one person's decision. We care
Yeah.
way too much about food, but uh, whatever works for you.
Yes,
It's
absolutely. And so your comments right now are leading me to one more question. So what process do you recommend for couples to identify kind of how to prioritize their financial situation?
uh, well, read the book, work with me are always helpful. But
Yeah.
honestly, it's self-reflection and then conversation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Just in terms of trying to keep it as accessible as possible, it just,
Have that ongoing conversation, start early, not on the first
yeah.
date, but you know.
And, and, allow for space for things to change
Yes, love that.
and also allow space for you to have different some goals that don't strictly overlap,
Yeah.
right? I mean, there are things that are pretty key, like one person wants to have kids, the other person doesn't. I've never heard a compelling argument for how to navigate that in a relationship. But, I like vacations and you like gadgets. We can overcome that. We can plan for a reasonable amount of both,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and, just about being able to have that conversation, keep your wits about you. And it's really up to the individual couple to cultivate what they want, just like any other area of your relationship, right?
Right.
Just like parenting, for example, just like how you choose to structure your days and your lives and your emotional intimacy. And I want to give people the tools and skills to be able to decide that for themselves, right?
Sure.
Rather than
Yeah.
just like what they've heard or what like society told them or what their parents did, or what their
Mhm.
parents didn't do. So in terms of your priorities,
Yeah.
have a glass of wine and talk about things you've always wanted to do,
Yeah.
right? Like
I
that
like
one in
that answer.
particular. Yeah, that one in particular, like this dialogue in particular, it can be a fun one. It can be stressful. I'm not like pretending that there's no complicated aspects, and you might be afraid that your partner might think what you want is silly or what have you, right? But um, for the most part, how do you get on the same page about your priorities? Well, you think about what are my priorities,
Mhm.
and then you tell your significant other.
Yeah.
And then if they're naturally aligned, fantastic. And if they're not, then that's where you can go and say, okay, well, does this actually create any sort of issue or tension, uh, in kind of tactically speaking, or is it just we have some differences because we're two different people, and you think about it like ordering from a restaurant. It's
Yeah.
okay if you want one entree and your significant other wants a different entree. You
Hmm.
just order one of each, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And not to trivialize it, but like that same kind of idea is possible. And that's the thing. Are there times where different goals can be challenging?
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But you don't have to stick with the assumption that it's automatically a problem and it's automatically bad and all right, all that.
Yeah.
Um, Allow yourself to talk about that and see. And then if you need to reach out to somebody who can help you identify, like, is this an issue like we're thinking it is, or are there other ways that we might be able to look at this?
Hmm.
Then that's where reaching out to someone like myself, another financial coach or financial therapist, makes a lot of sense because they can help you really open up
Yeah.
that spectrum of what seems possible.
Okay. Got it. Thank you. And I know we mentioned your book a couple times. And we just scratched the surface on what you have in that. I know you have a ton of information, but talk about your new book.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, really, the book is everything I've learned from my work with clients and my relevant educational backgrounds and certifications and stuff. And I decided I was going to put it in a book form and, put my name out there and make it accessible to people. And the book is called Financial Intimacy for Couples: How to Achieve Clarity, Teamwork, and Peace of Mind with Your Money. And I say financial intimacy because I do believe this is an area where couples can come closer together if they have the tools and skills and put in the effort to connect. Uh, and at the same time, it's not just about the warm and fuzzies. You do want to have clarity in terms of where you're at financially.
Mm.
You want to be able to feel like you're working as a team, however you structure that. And ultimately, it's not just about getting the things you want in life, but also trying not to have as much of that stress as you have if you don't feel like you can talk about it, or you're unsure where you're at, or you're dealing with a difficult financial situation. So, peace of mind is something that can feel elusive, I think, today, and for any number of reasons. And so, if I can bring a bit more of that to people's lives, then that's a worthy endeavor. And
Yeah.
that's really at the core what the book is about. It's available on Amazon, and if people want to find out more, you can actually sign up to be notified when the book is available. Not just the launch, which is November 1st, 2024, but also there's going to be some opportunities to download a free copy of the ebook. And so if you visit my website, you can sign up to get notified.
Okay.
Uh, and the website is couplesfinancialcoach.com, which that's where you find, everything. Set up a consultation, listen to my on hiatus podcast, read blogs, whatever. But if you go to couplesfinancialcoach.com/book dash interest, like BOOK-INTEREST. That will take you to the page where you can put in your information, sign up to get notified, and we'll let you know when the book is available to download for free. And otherwise, you can just search for it on Amazon.
Great. I will put that in the show notes. And thank you so much for all of the insight, Adam. I think this topic is it's an incredibly powerful one that I think a lot of people don't realize, to your point, until they're in that moment and things start to fracture in the relationship. So again, we appreciate the insight. So thank you again, Adam.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.